Inge Eleanor Doris Tollhuhn was born on the 9th of June 1927. Her parents married the previous year, and their names were Herbert and Anita. You can see a picture of her parents marked with a cross, her mother on the left and her father's on the left lying down on the grass. Here is a much later photograph of 4 generations of daughters with Oma, Mutti, Inge and her daughter Mariana.
Well, I was born in Königsberg.
Well, just how did you come to meeting Hitler?
Everybody had to go out, all the children, and do the street, you know, like you do. The
like
kids.
A parade?
Yeah, and we did. We stood next to each other like that. And then this car came. I didn't know who he was. He came just a few girls before me. He came off the car and then started shaking our hands. I think I was the last one. And then he went back into the car. And when I come home, I said to my mother, who was that man? He had a bit of black down here, you see? And he was in a car and he stopped and he shook our hands. You shook hands with the devil and your hand will drop off. And I used to look as a child every day. I've still got my hand. Yeah, but she didn't say he was Adolf Hitler or anything like that. He was the devil, she said. And he only come to investigate Prussia to see what he could get out of us. That was why the war started, to march into Poland, because he wanted a corridor. And I used to go skiing. And I jumped a lot, you know, these big jumps you do. And my leg started to pain. My mother put a hot cushion on it and all sorts. But nothing worked, so they had to go and take me to the doctor. And he said she's got to go immediately in hospital because she got osteomyelitis. But they came, the professor came, or whatever he was, and he said, you've got to take your leg off. So I asked the nurse, please tell my mum what's happened. She did, and my mother came at 11 o'clock at night with a great big bag, and I thought, remember thinking, why is she bringing a big bag? Is she going to stay the night, you see? Anyhow, in the morning at 6 o'clock they came for me to take me to the theatre. They come just through the door to the ward, and my mother gets up and she beats them with this big bag. Anyhow, they sent for the police, the hospital, and it went to court. My father had to come and my mother had to go to court. The judge said she has to have 3 of the best professors we have here in Königsberg.
What were your last memories of your father?
Walking from the hotel, he came on leave from the hotel. We walked to the station, right? And he took his ring off and he said, yeah, love, you keep that. Say, that was the last walk we had.
And he was sent to Italy
yeah,
to fight?
Yeah. We couldn't understand what he was doing in Italy then. And that's where he died. And he's been buried there, and you've seen the picture. Everybody was packing because there was a lot of people who went before away from here. When we left, we saw a big black snake of people, refugees going past our hotel, right? And there were 2 German soldiers who said to us, to my mother, get ready to run because the Russians are about 20 minutes away. And then my mother come out and we saw all these thousands of people going there, all dressed and having a band round their neck with a cat in or a dog in or a baby in. And then the English little planes, and they would just shoot among them, and they would just die, and the others would walk past because everybody wanted to live, you see. So my mother went back into the hotel, got a sheet out. We went down to the sand, and then we covered ourselves with a sheet when we heard the plane coming, so that they couldn't see us in the snow. We had to run then.
Did you know what you were walking towards, or just towards Germany?
Yeah, no, they told us to go to Gdansk, to Poland, and there are ships going out.
So it wasn't just the civilians leaving East Prussia, the soldiers were leaving as well?
The Germans running as well, you see. And some would take us in a tank, my mother and me. Where we passed the villages, they were already gone. So sometimes we were lucky enough to get a house where we could maybe go in bed there and sleep, glad to be warm, dry, not wet with snow. Sometimes we had to do igloos.
Igloos?
So that you just had one side where you didn't have the wind, so that we could sleep in there and be protected, you see. And knocked on a door, but the door just opened. And her and her 3 children, I think she had, they were all nailed with the tongue on the table.
The tongues were nailed to the table?
Pardon?
The tongues were nailed to the table?
Yeah.
By the Russians?
By the Russians, yeah.
When you got to Gdansk, what did you see there?
The big ship. Thousands of people going on this big ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, right? And so we go on there as well. My mother says, come on, we're getting on this boat. And then we went in the corner because obviously the water was taken out.
Of the swimming pool?
At the swimming. We fell asleep, my mum and I.
Did you feel safe?
Yes.
On the boat?
Thousands of people there, thousands.
And they all thought that they were safe?
And they all thought they were safe. She woke me up and she says, Inge, off the ship. Off the ship. And I'm crying and I'm saying, why? And all talking a lot of rubbish there. I don't want to go. She says, get off the ship. And we had to fight to get off the ship because
it was already full.
It was already full, you see, and there thousands of people coming there, and it was shaking, pushing them, just that we could get out. Why did we have to go? And she says, because I dreamt at home our coffee table were swimming in water. I said, but that's at home. We don't have a home now. There's nothing there anymore. So she said, no, off. And that was it.
The tragedy of the Gustloff had its roots in the endless winter of 1945, when the Third Reich was living out its last days. 5 million Germans were fleeing the Russian army, who now were entering Germany's own East and West Prussia. The brutality that the Nazis had inflicted on the Soviet Union was now being repaid. To be German was to be destroyed. To many, this was, and still remains, justice. Adding to the refugees' terror of the Russians was the Nazis' own anti-Soviet propaganda, vividly portraying the enemy's brutality.
Every woman was systematically raped, and children were killed, and it was a form of ethnic cleansing.
Their only hope of survival was safe passage on a ship like the Gustloff. In May of 1938, the 640-foot Wilhelm Gustloff had been launched as the crown jewel of Germany's luxury liners, moored permanently in the port of Gotenhofen. Then in 1945, the refugees began to arrive, and the Gustloff became the beacon of hope for those escaping the implacable revenge of the Red Army.
This how we walked in the snow with prams and that. This is terrible. See, that's where they climbed up on the ship.
April 15th, 1912, more than 1,500 people die on the Titanic. May 7th, 1915, 1,198 die when the Lusitania was torpedoed by a German submarine. December 7th, 1941, 1,177 perish aboard the USS Arizona. This is the calculus of catastrophe. But on January 30th, 1945, more perished in one sea disaster than all who died on these tragedies, multiplied by 3.
From this dock, the Wilhelm Gustloff, packed with German refugees, set sail. 9 hours later, the ship of hope became a ship of despair.
It is a staggering human disaster.
Then came the worst moments, the scream of all the people who were still on the boat.
Yet what happened remains a mystery.
That was the swimming pool where we were in that corner.
Germans, refugees, and some troops, fleeing the vengeful Red Army, desperately tried to escape. Thousands packed on board a former cruise ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff. Ava Dorn was one of them.
The cabins were already double, triple full, so it must have been around 6,000. And then the people came in, many more. They just came in, and came and came and came.
Ship records listed 7,000 people on board. To put things in perspective, a modern-day cruise ship carries 5,000 passengers. The Gustloff was built to carry 1,850 passengers. At 9:12 p.m. on January 30th, 1945, just 20 miles from the Prussian shore, the Gustloff was struck by 3 Soviet torpedoes. Within an hour, she was lying on the sea floor. Plunging into frigid 39-degree waters, only 996 passengers survived. It is a conservative estimate that 6,000 lost their lives. This is equal to 4 Titanics, making the sinking of the Gustloff by far the worst naval disaster in history. But amazingly, the scale of the tragedy could actually be much greater.
So many thousand.
This is where the first torpedo hit.
Yeah.
The second torpedo hit here.
Gustloff's final destination was to be the safe harbor of Kiel in Germany. But instead, she was sunk just 20 miles in 9 hours after her departure. The Gustloff then disappeared from history.
German propaganda kept pretty quiet about the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff, as it kept quiet about the whole of the disaster in East Prussia, West Prussia, and Pomerania.
German war guilt and reluctance to relive the past has kept a shroud over the Gustloff's story.
The victims themselves, they're so traumatized. I mean, they've suffered so much that they very frequently don't want to talk about it.
But history does agree on one point. It was the deadliest single disaster at sea. She was torpedoed by a maverick Soviet submarine captain, Alexander Marinesco, who, after the sinking, vanished into history, as did the story of the Gustloff.
I saw a woman standing there with 2 small children and an officer. He shot the children, the woman, and then himself. He seemed to foresee what would happen to us.
And the survivors all recall one important fact. The Gustloff went down quickly, in just 50 minutes.
The bow of the ship went down. The ship went down like this, like an arrow, and then it disappeared.
Our eyewitnesses claim that every available space on the ship was used for passengers. This is a number far greater than anyone suspected. Could the loss of life on the Gustloff be this monumental?
There were many mothers with 3 or more children. There wasn't a single surviving mother who had been able to save all her children.
The ship of joy had become the ship of death. Though we do not have the names of all who perished on that January night, we now have a number.
In present day, a maritime disaster of this magnitude would have been remembered throughout the world. The fact that its passengers and dependents were Germans, and the world had little time to mourn their passing. But after all these years, do they not deserve to be remembered?
Eventually, Inge, her mother, and other members of the family reached the relative safety of Germany. But even there, they weren't particularly welcome. Inge and Dennis settled in Manchester, and over the next 10 years had 2 children, Mariana and Dennis. Inge held down many vocations, including nursing, and even in her 60s she still had her own wool shop business, and until her mid-80s still drove her car and worked for charity. In the 90s, the old Prussian borders in Russia were reopened, and many Prussians made an annual trip back to their homeland. suffering the indignities of searches and long waits at the borders, something they resented greatly as the Russians had already stolen their land and plundered their homes and possessions. However, Inge made 3 trips back. Each time she was able to visit her family homes and rekindle the memories of a lost era.